So let's talk about CEO succession planning. And there are some boards who say to me, why? Why should I be talking about that? Isn't that the CEO's responsibility? And then I have not very many, but I do have some CEOs who will say, that's the board's responsibility, that's not my responsibility to get anybody ready for my role. And that is wrong. It's a dual responsibility. We're going to talk about that. But I have one client right now. The credit union's been my client since, I think we started like almost a year ago. And the board said to me, you know what? I think we need your help because they're a smaller credit union. And so they have 4 people who are like their management team. And then they only have about maybe 15 to 20 other people in the credit union. And all 4 of those people will probably be retiring in within 4 to 6 years. All 4. And so they were like, and our CEO won't take action. And so I said, so what do you want me to do? I came in and we've gone through the process. We've done he's done a pretty good job, and his team has done a good job of thinking about how they would do their succession. But he's probably the first one leaving. And he still thinks the board just needs to hire somebody when I leave. I shouldn't have to do anything to help them prepare. He's adamant about that. It's been a year. And all the chair, I just talked to the chair again and gave her an update on all of the other people. And I just gave her some hints, but I said what we did was we actually put that requirement as a part of his possible incentive. So if he's not doing a good job with succession, his incentive goes down. And so I just talked to her last week and I said, he's just going to be a little bit surprised at the end of the year when you guys give him much less than he thought he should get. And then maybe that'll get him going. But he should be, I think he wants to leave at the end of 2021. So really only has 2 years left. And we started this about a year ago. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But about 10,000 people a day will turn 65 until 2030. So the Pew Research Center out of Washington, D.C. did a study. And you know that baby boomers are retiring at a great rate here. And the research study this is a study done by the Pew Research Center. And what happened is they released the information at the end of 2009. And what it said was starting on January 1st, 2010, approximately 10,000 people a day will turn 65 until 2030. So that's 20 years of a lot of people coming to retirement age. And so what I just described at this credit union, where all of their management team may be getting to the age of retiring, that's happening more and more and more at other organizations. And if you think about your own credit union, if you think about your CEO, well, first of all, if you think about your CEO, how many of you think your CEO is going to leave and retire within the next, 5 years? Oh my gosh, really? Okay, 3 years? Okay, wow. Wow. I mean, I shouldn't be so surprised because it's and so then, okay, so looking at the rest of the executive team, what about them? Do you have some younger people, or are they retiring? Going to be retiring as well? It's your responsibility as board members. Yes, the CEO is absolutely your responsibility, but also to say to the CEO, what's your plan with your other executives? Do you have a plan? All right? Especially for all of you said within the next 5 years, hopefully, and I have to tell you, I've been getting lots of calls from CEOs who will say to me, they're starting to think about this. And they'll say, okay, I think I'm going to leave within the next 3 years. But guess what? My CFO just told me he wants to leave the same time I leave. And then, in this one situation, he's like, what do you think I should do? Should I talk to the board about it, or should I not tell them and just move ahead? And I said, I think you actually should talk to your board, because he needed to decide, they all needed to decide together what they're going to do. They don't want two people in the executive level leaving at the exact same time. I mean, literally, it was within a month, and the CFO didn't know that the CEO was planning to leave at that time. He hadn't announced it yet. And so what ended up happening, unfortunately for this credit union, was very costly. They ended up finding a new CFO and paying for two. And then what they ended up doing is they ended up hiring, promoting somebody from within for the CEO role, having them both work together for a few months. Then they said to the other CEO, who had literally 18 months left to go on his contract, they paid him out. Look at how much that cost. Double salary for CFO, double salary for CEO. That's a lot of money. So there needs to be more planning. Just like we talked about for boards, it's really, it even costs money, a lot more money when you're talking about the executives, right? So how many CEOs do you think will be retiring in the next 10 to 15 years? 80%? Somebody said? All right, well, actually, if we looked in this room, probably that's going to be correct. I actually said close to 50%. If we look about, but I think it's probably going to be more as well. If we go 10 to 15 years, I think you're right, especially seeing all of those hands in the room here. What will that turnover cause? It will actually cause a domino effect or a chain reaction. So what happens is, the CEO leaves at your credit union. Maybe there's a CEO at another credit union that wants your position, that position. That creates an opening at that credit union. Or you promote somebody from within, and you have that opening, and then that opening, if you promote from within. And I just, over the last few weeks, since I knew I was doing this presentation, I actually kept track in the Credit Union Times when they have, I don't know if they do it once a week, seems like it's pretty often, that they show the number of credit unions with the new CEOs. They introduce the new CEOs. So I counted. So in one day, they had 10. I thought, well, this is perfect. So in one day they had 10. What I did was I looked to see if they promoted from within or they hired from outside credit union. So what percentage do you think hired from within? 25, you say? You're shaking your head, yes? 15. 15? Anybody else? question? How many do you think hired from within?
Out of the 10.
Yeah. And you're saying 25 or 15. It's actually 80. 8 out of the 10 were hired from within. So they were promoted from within. Because probably they did a good job of CEO succession planning. Succession planning, unless the board just didn't want to go through the process, and just promote it from within. That could happen too. Yes?
I would say they did not do succession planning and that they're filling the position until they can find the right person.
Okay. Maybe. Some of them maybe that's the case.
Out of the 8, at least half of them.
I don't know. Succession planning for boards is becoming more common. 10 years ago, nobody was talking about it. If you look online, there's no software like I have out there in the world, and people are talking about it now. 10 years ago, nobody was talking about it. However, CEO succession planning a little bit different. I think some people who, CEOs should know that they have that responsibility to take a look at their people and try to get them ready for the position, potentially.
Of all of the conferences I've been to, and I've been to a lot of them here in Wisconsin, as well as CCUV, this is the first time that I have really seen something informational about CEO planning, succession. And I have been a chair for over 10 years.
It's not common, you haven't seen that.
No, I have not, and I go to the conferences. I'm one of the person that loves the education, and I look for this as the education. But again, you are the first one that has really come forth with any full plan.
I'm glad, because I think it's really important, and I've been working on this for a long time. But I also think that sometimes some CEOs think it's just mine, I'm just going to keep it, and not necessarily share the responsibility like they should with the board. That's why I'm telling you that there's a board responsibility to this, and there's a CEO responsibility to this. So that's what we're going to get to. Okay, so why do organizations fail to have CEO succession plans? Well, first of all, there's no clear understanding of who's responsible for developing the plan. And we're going to talk about who's responsible. They may have a young CEO. Well, guess what? They leave too. Perfect example I'm dealing with right now. One of my clients, so I was doing HR consulting, and I primarily did a lot of compensation design work, policies, that sort of thing. Did some executive search as well, but I don't do that in my current role, except that when I get asked by clients, and sometimes I give in and I say, okay, I'll help you out. Especially if they have a really good internal candidate, they just want to compare that person to some other people. So I do help them out with that. So this happened. So in June, I was called. I also run a CEO group, a mastermind group of CEOs. Credit unions usually range from about 100 million to about 750 million. So I have this group that meets on a monthly basis on the phone, and then we meet in person once a year. So we talk about all these different issues. And this guy's name is Matt, a $300 million credit union. He was in my group for 3 years. I did a lot of leadership development at their credit union, did some executive coaching of him and like his executive team for a couple of years. So he knows me really well. I know him. The credit credit union, didn't know the board very well. So he had a call in June. It's Matt. And I thought, well, it's not football season, because he usually calls me, he's a Patriots fan. Especially when, they beat the Packers, then he usually gives me a call the next day. I thought, well, why is Matt calling me? He ended up going 45 years old, had been the CEO for 12 years, and I was shocked, but he said, Yvonne, I have resigned my position at the credit union. And I said, well, what are you doing? And I was thinking he was going to say, I'm going to a bigger credit union. That seemed logical to me, just because I'm so pro-credit union. He said, I'm actually going to a bank that's more than 3 times our size as a CFO. And so, but they recruited him as a CFO because their CEO may be retiring in about 5 years, and they want to have Matt ready to go. And I mean, that can happen. And just like I said, the domino effect, you're a younger person, maybe like, our credit union's not growing fast enough, so I want to be CEO of a larger credit union. So as soon as that comes open, I'm going to move. So just because you have a young CEO doesn't mean you should be doing succession planning. Lots of people have emergency succession plans, but not a full plan succession. So a CEO succession plan, one part of it is an emergency succession plan. But that's just one part of it. So the emergency succession says, what if something happens to our CEO suddenly? How do we move forward? What's our interim plan? That's what this emergency plan is. So how many of you have an emergency succession plan? Okay, that's good. Everybody should have one. How many of you have a complete plan? You think you have a complete plan. Okay, so a couple of you. We're going to go through what the parts of the plan are, and you can kind of audit to see if that's what you have. And then the CEO is not held accountable for getting his or her part done of the plan. So I'm going to, in a little bit here, or it's the bottom of the priority list. There's so much going on in your credit union. Oh yeah, I mean, we have a CEO, hasn't announced retirement. We're not going to worry about it because we have all these other things going on. So it's the bottom of the priority list. So a lot of times I will be asked by people, will the skills needed by the next CEO be the same as those of the current CEO? They'll ask me, like we'll be talking, and they'll ask me, well, like I'll say, we need to talk about what the competencies are that you want for your new CEO. Well, shouldn't they be the same as our other one? We have had this person for 30 years. We love this person. The employees love this person. The members love this person. Shouldn't we get a person exactly like that person? I just say, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. And it depends on the strategic direction of the organization. So, with that long-term person, were you growing? Were they real forward-looking? Are you looking for someone who you want them to do things a little bit differently than the last person? Where do you want the credit union to go? Do you want, maybe the current person doesn't have or hasn't had an interest in electronic services, and you think, they're leaving, and we really need to get more heavily into that, so we need to get somebody with that background. Totally different. Maybe you have a CEO who's not really interested in being involved in the community, or in the local community, or like the national credit union community. And you think, you know what? Our credit union should really be more involved in the community. We want our CEO to be out there. Those are pretty common things that you would think about in terms of the CEO. So it really depends on what you're looking for. So what really is succession planning? Well, it's actually a continuous. Now you might think you know what it is, but there's a lot more to it than people actually realize. So it's a continuous leadership optimization process. So it's a process with the goal of identifying and developing a pool of talent, equipped with the skills, attributes, and experiences to fill key leadership roles. So succession planning, I don't like it when like credit union after credit union journal will say that they did, succession is done because they hired a new person. No, that is not succession planning. Succession planning is the process of figuring out what you will need in the future. Do you have people currently in your organization who can be developed into that role? And then a plan for development that is constantly evaluated and improved upon so that they can keep developing their skills. Why do you need a succession plan? First of all, to be able to respond effectively to change. So like this credit union I just talked about. CEO leaves quickly. Luckily, they had been working with me and he had been doing some good development of his staff. And so they've actually put an offer out to this CFO who's going to be the CEO. And they put it out the first week of October. Unfortunately, because all of this happened and it wasn't planned, the other person had a contract. The contract was from 2007. It was automatically renewed on an annual basis. So it's an old contract. And I said, when they showed me the contract, they said, no, you've got to get this renewed. You've got to have this looked at by an attorney. There's so many things that are out of date in this contract. So it's taken a while. So we still, as of yesterday, we're close on getting a contract done and presented. They presented the salary, that's all. So it's been, so this is what happens if you're not ready. And so that person's been waiting and they can't tell anybody. So like, they have to wait till the contract's negotiated before they can actually tell the employees. So one other employee knows, and then the CFO's family, the board members, and myself are the only people who know that she's going to be for like 4 weeks now. It's craziness. So I said to the attorney, I said, got to get this done by Monday so we can get it going. I'm trying to move the board ahead as much as possible. So this is what can happen. Just having to do things. And the board chair said to me yesterday, I did not have any idea how much work this was going to be. Not only to go through the process of finding a new person, but then the contract, putting a contract together. How many of you have a contract for your CEO? So a few of you. Larger credit unions do have contracts. Smaller credit unions tend to not have them. This credit union had one. That's why they wanted to continue to have one. I don't think they needed to have one necessarily. But when you get bigger, it's good for both the board and the CEO to kind of lay out so they understand everything, especially from the offer. You also need a succession plan so you can recruit and retain the best talent. So let's say that you're in there's two credit unions. One is a credit union where The CEO looks like he's probably gonna retire in 3 to 5 years, but doesn't talk about it with his staff, his senior staff. And there are staff people who want to be a CEO on his staff. And then there's this credit union, where this CEO is going to leave in 3 to 5 years, and he has his staff. And what he's doing is saying, okay, these are the types of things you need to have when you're the CEO. And he's looking at whether they have them or not, and he's providing development opportunities. So which credit union do you think will retain their executive staff, are more likely to retain their executive staff? Obviously, this credit union. So that's one good thing about doing succession planning. To support organizational growth, too. It's when you're developing people, it also, not only for the CEO role, but it also helps them develop for other executive roles. And so maybe you have someone who's a CFO, and I have a credit union who's in this situation right now. Actually, he's a CLO. So he's a chief lending officer. The chief operating officer was promoted to be the CEO. The chief lending officer is a younger man. And he said, I want to be a CEO someday. And what he'd like to do is be now the chief operating officer. And so hopefully they'll give him the opportunity to do that, because what they're doing then is they're also preparing for the future of another CEO. Because this person will then have all of this experience within the credit union to be the CEO. Biggest benefit to succession planning is that it provides a framework for management development, which helps align your leadership at the top of the organization with your strategic process. But what do you think is one of the most important prerequisites to succession planning? It's just one word. What was that? Planning. Attitude. Communication.
Expectation.
What was that?
Expectation.
Expectation.
Desperation.
It's actually trust. Because you know what? It's the CEO's your responsibility. If you don't have a good trusting relationship with the CEO, he or she is not going to be open with you about potentially leaving the organization and when, or actually even letting other executives be a part of the board meetings, your planning sessions. I had one of the guys he was in my group, my CEO group 1 year. And so what they get in terms of that, it's a mastermind group, but they also get a coaching session, private coaching session with me each month. And during the private coaching, he did say to me, you know, I'm going to be leaving the credit union within 3 years. And I said, well, have you talked to your board about that? He goes, well, when's a good time to talk to the board? I said, well, you know, at least 2 years, but 3 years would be nice to let them know. You don't have to announce it to the world or to the employees, but tell your board about it. He goes, I can't. And I said, why? Because I think that they will just get rid of me immediately now if they find somebody else. So something must have happened in that relationship along the way that he would feel like the board would suddenly promote somebody from within or let him go quickly. So trust is really important. So what are the critical elements that are missing in most succession plans? Well, the first one is the succession plan for anticipated succession. So somebody gave you notice, somebody's retiring, so you have this whole plan. So what's the board gonna do? It's not just emergency succession, it's like what is the process the board needs to go through at that point. Identification of critical competencies. So what are the competencies? And this part is the board's responsibility, is to figure out what are the critical competencies we would want in our future CEO. And then a development plan. And this is probably the thing that is the hardest part for the CEO and executives. And when it's a big part of the software that I've created. It's a big part of succession planning. And so people get to this part and they're like, I have no idea. I know they have to work on their relationship and communication skills. But what am I going to write down that they have to actually do? Like attend a course on it, work with an executive coach. So recently I just rolled out, I have now a library of things I can pick from in there, but we're going to be talking about this in a little bit. But development plans, I will check on clients and say, how are you doing? And they'll say, good. Except I got to the development plan stage and I don't know what to say. What I tell people at that point, especially CEOs, is I'll say, ask your potential successors. Say, this is what I'm seeing that you need to work on. Help me figure out what I could do, what you could do to increase those skills. And they have all kinds of ideas. Somebody I was just talking with who didn't, he's an executive, he tried for the CEO, but 4 of them internally tried for it. And he did get to be the top 2, but he didn't get it. And so one of the things he's working on is he said, I need to make sure I'm coming across that I'm not, like I'm not angry about it, or that I'm pushing against the new CEO because I'm not, and somebody mentioned something to me. And so we talked about it. I said, well, what could you do? What do you think you could do? You could put this in your plan. That would help. And he said, well, maybe I could have like an accountability person or 2 that when we're in meetings, after the meeting, I could check in with them to say, how did I do? Or check in with them on occasion. So we actually put that in his plan. He picked one of his colleagues who's a CFO, and then he picked, I think he picked another executive as well. And so I just had a coaching session with him yesterday, and I said, hey, did you have a chance to talk to these people, or have you? And he said, yeah, and it's been really good. It's been good to get feedback. So people can, so that's what I'm trying to teach people, because sometimes they tend not to want to do succession planning because they don't want to get to that part where they have to hold people accountable. And that's the most important part of the whole thing. And you as a board should see a CEO succession plan at least once a year, or at least hear about one. And it should have all these components that we're talking about in it. All right, so you have a handout, or there's handouts on the table. So I want you to take the one that looks like a pyramid. I want you to take that one first. Does everybody have one? The one that looks like a pyramid. I want to go through the CEO's succession planning solution. So what does it really look like? Well, at the bottom, and I need you to write in define. So at the bottom, we're defining what the competencies are for the CEO that we would look for in the future. Now, some people will say, we'll look at their current CEO and just write down everything that they have. It really is forward thinking, because some of your CEOs might not leave for 10 years. Some of them may leave in 2 or 3 years. So think ahead, define. So the bottom, one of the most important parts is the CEO's role, okay? So mark that down as your role. The next part is determine. Determine who the potential successors are. This is the CEO's role. Who are those potential successors? Now, if you're a smaller credit union, you may not have anybody. What I want you to think about though, and I've worked with a lot of smaller credit unions, what you need to think about though is maybe you don't have anybody right now who could be a potential successor. But as your credit union is hiring new people, maybe you think about that when you're hiring new people. Like, what skills are we looking for when we're hiring new people? The other thing, when you're a smaller credit union, you want to make sure at least you have an emergency successor identified. Okay? Now, people will say, okay, do I just pick somebody from staff? What other smaller credit unions have done is they've actually listed maybe the person who just retired, or who most recently retired as your CEO, who could fill in. You could talk to that person and see if they'd be willing to be an emergency successor, just for a short period of time. Or some people will write down, they'll talk to another smaller credit union or a credit union in their area. They'll talk to that CEO and say, if something happens to our CEO, are you willing to be an emergency person for us? And so they'll actually write those people's names in their plans. Okay? Yes?
Should you include an emergency CEO in finding your regular CEO then, if that's the route that you go?
Should you include them in the process?
Process of finding them?
If they're interested, is that what you mean?
Well, you're talking about an emergency CEO, right? Like-
Yeah, an interim, yeah.
Okay, interim. Should that person then be involved in finding a new permanent?
Okay, no. Okay, CEO, interim, doesn't matter. No, they are not involved. It's your responsibility. That's a really, really good question, because it happens where boards will say to their CEO, and I have this one in my mind right now. He called me and he said, I think I need help. The CEO called me. And he said, I'm retiring and the board's requiring me to find my successor. Now, this is different. CEO succession planning is different. This is preparing your people to potentially be ready to be the CEO. But when you talk about suddenly, there's the person's gone. No, it's the board's responsibility. That's it. Thank you, Brad, for mentioning that.
I got a better question.
Okay. You think so? Okay.
All right, let's say our CEO is going to retire in 2 years. He retires.
Okay.
Now I've got an opening on my board. As a retired CEO, can he come on the board?
Oh, that is just as good as this question.
It's not better, it's just as good.
It's just as good. Okay, let's think about this. So you are CEO of a credit union. Are you guys on the same board?
Yes.
Okay. So let's think about this. So let's say you are a new CEO coming in to a credit union, and the ex-CEO is on the board. Is that positive or negative to you?
Intimidating.
That's another no. That's a no. I know that a lot of CEOs, when they go into retirement, would like to stay active. And I actually know one CEO who went to another credit union on the board, a really small one, smaller than their credit union. So, but no, I would say I don't like the idea. I don't encourage it. I know it happens, but it really puts the new CEO in a tough situation, because it takes so much time for the board members not to feel influenced by that ex-CEO. So.
What if the CEO waited a year or 3 years, then wanted to get out of the board?
Well, how many of you, now we're going back to a little bit of board succession planning, which is fine, because this is really a good point. How many of you have policies for your nominating committee that says they can't be current or former employees of the credit union or for a period of time? So you do have it, is it for a period of time or not at all, ever?
Period of time.
How long is it? 5 years. So they have it, it's 5 years. I've seen 3 years. I like 5 years. Because then you're away from the day-to-day of the credit union. But that was a really good question. So it should be not only the CEO, but any employee. Good question. Okay. All right, so the board's defining competencies. The CEO's determining who the potential successors are, and then it's off. And then the CEO's helping to develop the potential successors. So it's define, determine, develop. And when you put development plans together, then what? You have prepared successors, hopefully, down the line.
How long are you thinking that this process takes place? I mean, for a CEO retiring in 3 years or 5 years on there, is it a 3-year process to get an internal person ready for the position, or longer, or what?
Are you on the board too of that credit union?
No.
Oh. I was gonna say.
We are friends.
That is a good question too. Actually, it depends on the person. You know, it kind of depends on the person. However, I get calls for CEO succession planning when there's only 1 year. 1 year before the person's leaving. You cannot, it's very, very hard if the people aren't already almost ready for the CEO role to get them ready. Can they get ready if you really do good development in 3 years? Yes. But they have to, well, okay, let me give you a really good example. So, large credit union on the West Coast, 3 years ago they called me and they said, we need to do CEO succession planning. Our CEO is leaving in May of 2020, or March. Maybe he's leaving, no, I think he's leaving in May of 2020. Okay, so 3 years ago, they say, we want to do succession planning. Okay, great. So I met with the board, they picked the competencies that they wanted. I interviewed, and then the board said to the six, they had 6 senior executives, said to the 6, how many of you want to go through the development process with Yvonne? Because we're going to hire her, and 3-year period to go through this process. It doesn't mean that you have to raise your hand, that you're interested in the CEO role yet, but that you're just interested in development. So all 6 of them raised their hand. I expected 2, got 6. All right, 2 people. So the board, at the beginning, said to me, I kind of asked them, I said, are there people that you're thinking they're, at this point, you're more likely to hire than not? Okay, there were 2 people, okay, that they named. All right, but then everybody wanted to go through, all 6 of them, and I'm like, okay, big project. So what we did was, I interviewed them, we figured out where their gaps were, we put development plans together, and then quarterly, I met with each of them to go over how they're doing on their plan. I met with the CEO to check on how they're doing. Gave an update to the board. Okay, skip to 2.5 years later. Okay, skip to 2.5 years later. Along the way, one of the 2 gentlemen, they were both gentlemen that although there were 2 other, there's 1 woman. No, 2 women. 2 women that went through the development process. But the 2 were gentlemen that they were thinking about. All right, as I'm going through the development process, the one guy who really thought he should be the next person, and the CEO thought he should be the next person as well, he didn't try. I went through the development process with him quarterly, and I thought, oh my gosh. And his 360 that he did, his feedback from his staff was bad when we first started. And I thought, does he not realize that he really has to work on this? That he doesn't have this wrapped up in the bag? So it got to be this year, in the spring. They redid the 360. No change to his 360. He interviewed. 4 of the 6 people raised their hand and said, I want to be considered for the CEO role. The board decided to, because they've gone through this process, they said, I think we have some really good people, so we don't have to look externally. So we're going to just do it internal. They interviewed the 4 people and picked 2 people for the final process. And guess what? Guess who did not make it to the final process? That person who didn't work on his development. And one of the people, the other person who they thought at the beginning did, but then one of the more newer employees, younger, much younger, he made it. He did an incredible job. He made it. So you can, I would say, in 3 years, you can do it if you are willing to do it. You know, I think 1 year's not long enough, and like I said, I think you can do it in 3 years. It's just you have to make sure that the person's actually doing the work. All right, there's another handout that you have. So this is this is the process. This is the define up here, determine, and develop. So this is like putting it in like a model for you. So because the define is part of a board's role, which would be this top part where I have the competencies. Let me put that up here, up on the top. I want you to take a couple of minutes, and just think really broadly, what are some of the big competencies we would like to see in a future CEO? And then we'll talk about it. So just take a couple minutes. Write them down here on your paper. What are some of the competencies? And we'll talk about it. I'll show you a bunch that you should consider as well. How you doing? Is this hard? It might be hard. Is this hard for you? Because you haven't thought about it. Maybe you haven't thought about this. Let's just throw some out. Get some ideas out there. So, anybody have one they want to throw out? Communication. Okay.
People person.
People person.
Tech savvy.
Tech savvy.
Financial background.
Financial knowledge.
Leadership qualities.
Leadership. Knowledge. Leadership.
Experience.
Community involvement.
Okay. Community involvement.
Someone who can build teams and those, how those teams do.
Yeah, so like collaboration. So, or continuous improvement.
Forward thinking, new
Forward
ideas,
thinking.
products.
Great, you guys are doing great.
Education.
Education. We will go generally here, just so you know. Education and experience are usually part of your job description. So these will be basic requirements. If your CEO job requires a degree, for example, you need to let your potential successors know so that they can get a degree if they don't have one. Because that's happened at a number of credit unions that I've worked with, where somebody didn't know, oh, I needed to have a degree. Well, if I would have known that, so this might not be a part of the competencies, but this is definitely important for them to know. Do we have one more? Yes,
Risk taker.
risk taker.
But I had
Calculated. All right, let me show you. Oh, yeah. go ahead.
We run into a problem with, we had directors that applied for president positions at the new hospital that we opened.
Oh.
We promoted, or they went from director to vice president. What we found was that they really didn't know how to make that leap into what their responsibilities now were versus what they were. So they ended up still working as on a director role, but they really needed to take a leap up to. So if you do internal candidates, they need to be able to say, I'm no longer this, I'm now this up here, and my view is different, and I need to focus on different things.
Okay. So maybe in your case, if they were board operational knowledge would have been good.
Right.
I think we would look for experience.
Okay. I'm going to show you. Okay, so what I have in the software is I have competencies from suggestions. So like an ambassador, Or I also have community involvement up there. I've defined all of these as well, and these are just common competencies. Now, you wouldn't pick every single one of these, but I give you some to start with. Collaboration, confidence. Do they have confidence? Decisiveness, financial knowledge you have. Integrity. And somebody might say, well, isn't integrity just expected? Doesn't anybody who apply have integrity? Well, in the software, what they do is the CEO will look at each potential successor and rate them on a scale of 0 to 10 on each of them. And I said one time to one of the CEOs, he rated one of his guys, who ended up getting the job, by the way, after 2 years. He rated his integrity like a 7. I don't think he went down to a 6. I think he went to a 7. And everybody else got a 9 or a 10. And I said, okay, tell me why. Tell me why. Well, that executive tended to play favorites, treat people differently who reported to him. Motivation is really about how motivated are they for the position. So for example, you need to be aware of this. There are some people within your credit unions who will apply for the CEO role because they feel like, first of all, they feel like, I've been here a really long time, I'm in an executive role, I'm kind of next in line. So they feel like that. Instead of saying, I've always wanted to be a CEO, and I really want to do this, they feel like, oh, well, it's my responsibility, I'm next in line. There are others who feel pressure from employees. So employees say, wow, you would be great as our next CEO. You've been here a really long time. We really like you. You need to go for it. And they feel pressure. And they don't really want it. I've had 2 situations in the last year. One situation where I was coaching someone who really, really wanted the job, but the CEO at that organization really was kind of pushing the other candidate. When they actually got down to the interviews, the other person who the CEO was pushing finally said, you know what, I really don't want this. I really don't want it. And they're a $7 billion credit union. I really don't want this. And can you imagine if she just actually, because she was under so much pressure, took the job, what would have happened there? The other situation was the person who thought, it's my turn now. I'm the next person, but she didn't get it. Somebody else did. She called me the next day and she said, oh my gosh, I think that was really good that Steve got it because when I think about it, that's really not the job for me. We talked about community involvement, continuous improvement. Are they constantly working with their employees and processes within their organization to improve? Delegation. Fit the situation. Do they fit the culture of the organization? Leadership development, we talked about operational knowledge, we talked about communication, we talked a little bit about vision and strategy. So these are very, very common ones that we see. That's why I have it in my library. But then there are also others. People have, like you put down, tech savvy. Absolutely, others have added that as well. Yes?
Well, one of the things over my career that in the industry I previously worked in at one time, and looking back now that I'm older, most of the people that were promoted to president or higher within the company all came from one area of background to a great extent. I mean, I know some industries are maybe very heavy on sales or marketing. They bring up their people in the organization that way. Some are operational, maybe in some of it's engineering or whatever. And looking at the previous industry that I was in and various organizations. I saw a number of individuals that because they weren't going to get promoted, because they didn't have this experience, they left to go to another company. So I mean, it just seemed that you had to have this experience or this background to move yourself out.
See, and when you're doing succession planning, you're letting them know what you're looking for, so that they can try to get that experience. But in your case, maybe, you know, they knew that, but they weren't given the opportunity. As a board, and it comes down to your CEO is going to leave or has left, do you hire from within, do an external search, or merge with another credit union? All right, so the credit union I was just talking about a little earlier in Maine, that the CEO was 45 and he left. Do you know how many, and Maine doesn't have that many credit unions, but do you know how many credit unions actually contacted the board chair regarding merger? I think 4 or 5. And they're actually the 3rd largest credit union already in the state. And 4 or 5, even smaller ones, were asking if they want to merge. So you always, and then the chair said this to me and sent me the emails and said, and I said, well, we should probably have a conversation. Well, no, I think we'll just let it go. We won't respond. And I said, no, you need to respond, because we also need to let the candidates know who are applying that this is out of the question at this point. Because people, one of the first things candidates will do is say, are you considering merger? And if you are, you're probably going to lose that candidate. Do you have a comment? Or?
If you have a couple of good candidates from within, do you still recommend doing an external search?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, if you feel like you're really, really going to hire one of the 2 people, you could, I guess this is what I would say. I would say still go through a pretty detailed process. Still make them interview with you, maybe give a presentation to you. Go through that process, because there have been cases where some of my clients, NCUA has come in and said, you didn't even look outside. The credit union just automatically went with your internal person. Well, what they were saying essentially is you didn't have a process. So I think you can do that, or make them go through. Make them go through a process that you would go through, or for an external person as well. So there's just hiring from within, there's doing an external search, allowing your people to apply, but you're mainly looking at a national search. And then there's kind of a in-between. Like, we have some really good candidates, but like for this one in Maine that I worked on, we just actually advertise at the leagues only in that area. Like the Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, like in New Hampshire, that area, we didn't do a national search. But then at least we were comparing. Then the board said, wow, the 4 people that we interviewed, any one of them could do the job, but we think we want to go, we know we want to go with our internal. So it's philosophical. You as a board you're going to have to discuss it when it comes down to it. What is our philosophy about this? If the members came to us later and said, you just hired a new CEO, what process did you use, or why didn't you go externally and look, or did you go? You have to feel confident in your process. So that's You know, I always go back to how will you respond if your members have questions as a board? Last night I was dealing with this credit union in Maine. The person who wants a job wants a really expensive car. She wants the credit union to pay for it. It's $20,000 more than what the last CEO got. We want to give an allowance, so if she wants that car, she can have that car, but she won't get as much in terms of mileage and that sort of expenses. And so I said, I reiterated to the board, I sent an email, reiterated, you need to make sure that you feel comfortable with whatever decision you make in if a member would approach you at an organizational meeting or at an annual meeting and ask you about why is my CEO of my credit union driving around in a $65,000 or $75,000 car, you have a good reason for that. You can defend your decisions. That's all I said. That's all I'm going to say to you as well. And I think we better stop.